I do, I got a question. So I know you had 7,800 acres for management. Was that shaded fuel break and the thinning under 80 all in one, or is it?
Yes.
Is that it? Okay.
Is this a time for public questions?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah, fire away.
Why are you decommissioning the roads up here?
Yeah.
You said something about decommissioning roads, and we've been doing that for years up here, and it really hasn't worked very well. So I'm wondering, you said you were going to open up some more roads, but you're going to decommission some? That was on one of your slides.
So they're just temporary roads that we use to access the thinning units. So they were never going to be permanent roads that would be a part of our road system.
Are we still under that mandate that says we can't build any more roads without decommissioning some?
Yeah, it's changing with the current administration. So where we're at right now, just as far as road decommissioning in general, is we're not doing it.
Good.
So the regional forester right now currently has a moratorium in the entire region for doing any kind of road decommissioning right now. So of permanent roads. So that's the permanent road decommissioning is not part of the project. It's just those basically temporary logging roads to get through a unit to get to the other side, and then they'll decommission it as they come out. So there will be no decommissioning of any current system roads.
Yeah, currently there's a lot of decommissioned roads out there that were well built and spent thousands and thousands of dollars to build them. It would really be helpful for firefighting to put those back in service.
And we can talk later, Dana, too. But we do have right now some partnership going on with the National Forest, NAFO, National Alliance of Forest Owners, to actually, open some of those or make those so that they're fire fightable.
Yeah, you look at all the private land, forest land around here, and they don't decommission any roads. They keep them all open and they maintain them for fire. So you can get to the fire, put it out when it's small. So.
No, roads are part of it. Roads, rivers, and ridges, right? That's where we fight fires.
First, I'm with Dana. I believe the roads should not be decommissioned. I think they're cultural resources that are really important. My concern, and put all my cards on the table, I'm here as I recently transitioned to politician, so this is my voting district. But also I'm a forest scientist with more than 50 years experience with wildfires and reforestation. The first day of the Holiday Farm Fire burns 37,000 acres. One reason I really like this project is it's 35,000 acres. That much burned up in 24 hours. So variable density thinning, so I'm totally for the total project, but you're only thinning 7,000 or 8,000 acres, and variable density thinning is not much of a reduction in wildfire risk, and it's economically really bad. So if we're going to actually address reducing wildfire risk, we got to look at the fuels. So we got to look at all 35,000 acres. And if we're looking at income and local jobs, which I think we really should be, our schools and roads in this county are supposed to get 25% of the receipts from timber sales on federal lands. This is not going to produce very much money. It's going to be really expensive to do, and it's not going to effectively reduce wildfire risk. And my problem is with these roads, what you're calling variable density fire breaks, you're planning for big fires in the future. You're not planning for recreation or harvesting or active management. It's you're setting ourselves up for just more of these Cedar Creek, Tumblebug, Holiday Farm type events that didn't occur during the first 40 years of my life because people were out there, the roads were open, and people were actively managing the forest. And we can argue with the clear cutting and so on, but my position is we should be restoring the landscape to favor not only people, but wildlife and rare and endangered species, and protecting our old growth. We just lost 700,000 acres of old growth through preservation and roadless areas over the last 25 years on Forest Service land. We've lost tens of thousands of acres of old growth here in Lane County, and we're not even salvaging it. We're just letting it burn again. So those are my concerns. I really support this project, but I think we should be looking at 35,000 acres and not 7,000 or 8,000. And we should be doing the types of projects that restore the landscape to where it is safer for wildlife and better for people.
I'd have to back Bob on that too. You know, you look around the country, I've been a firefighter for 47 years. I've been on overhead teams for State of Oregon for 18 years as an operations chief. I've seen a lot of fires all over the country, all over Oregon anyways. They do things different in different fuel types, but one of the things, you look at 97, they've got 150 feet everything on either side of the road. That makes a huge fuel break there, and you can stop a fire from running across a 300-foot thing when you got paved access to it. So, you know, you can thin around the roads, but you need to take all the fuel out too. And when you have a whole bunch of dead trees there, that's not really helping much. The other hat I wear is I'm on the Mackenzie School Board for the high school up here. And our school used to be the richest one in Oregon because of all the timber revenue. Now we have no money. We have a declining enrollment because all the houses burned down. And we're just starving right now. We had to transition to a charter school. We have a declining enrollment, and we don't know what we're going to do next year when the COVID money runs out and the holiday farm park runs out. So if we could get some more logging back in here, cut some of the trees that are right next to the road so we can make a wider area for a fuel break, that would be great.
Yeah, I have a question about about the shaded fuel breaks. Looking at the maps, it's pretty much all the main roads, the main arteries through the area. And I've driven a lot of those roads over the last year or two, and it seems like they've already been pretty heavily thinned along the route. So is there going to be more, or when was that work done, and aren't there already some pretty, hasn't it already been treated along most of those roads?
You can bring up that map. You're probably talking about that from the Boulder fire.
Well, I don't.
You probably know the road numbers.
Yeah, so it's like just the Boulder, the 26.
Yeah, Foley has all been, had a masticator up there.
So is it like this loop here, maybe?
We did something up a Wally down to the Boulder.
Here,
Yeah,
down.
so maybe not all of them, but a fair number of them. I've driven a lot of those roads.
And good point. And then
By different fires.
Right,
yeah.
so they only did it on one side there because the fire was coming from, that's what they only did it on one side of the road. But I think, I'm just asking somebody that's supposed to. I think the reason why you're including the ones that already been done, because you want to talk about the effects of keeping it maintained for the future, correct?
Yeah, we want to be able to treat them in the future how we think is best, not under an emergency situation where our hand is forced and we're just trying to do it right and follow NEPA. So basically we're covering that area again. We're not saying that we're necessarily taking more trees out of those areas. They'll meet the prescription that we're shooting for, but we just want to keep it open so that in the future, if we want to do hand thinning there or whatever we decide through this process might be an appropriate treatment in the future. So that's the ideal of that.
It might be some, stuff like knocking back some of the shrub layer and
Yeah.
stuff too. So,
Yeah.
Sure, because it'll keep going up, yeah.
Exactly.
And these are on our pause lines, right?
No, those are just strategic areas that we think could be good options for firefighters to get a grip on a fire before it gets too big.
And just to clarify, what's been done was as part of an emergency response.
Yeah, that
to the
was,
fires
a lot
were
of that
not
was
part
under
of-
the lookout fire, and that's, like, we are trying to avoid that
Yeah.
with this project and just do it right,
Yeah,
so.
okay,
Yeah.
What does that look like doing it right compared to like in the moment?
Yeah, so, doing it right, when we're in the moment, we try to do the best that we can. We have resource advisors out there that are looking, they know where the invasive weeds patches are, they know maybe where the spotted owls are. The archaeologists, but they can't always get there in time. Like, we have to move really quickly in a wildfire scenario, as quickly as we can. And so doing it right involves getting all of that input from all of our resource specialists and skipping those areas if we need to, or deciding what treatment would be appropriate. Like, say there's a resource concern and we can't have heavy equipment in it, we can skip it, but maybe we can do hand thinning in there because it's a little more gentle. So just really having some finesse in the treatment.
And I also think too with streams and stuff, too,
Yeah.
whether we do it right, with
Yep.
buffers and stuff like that.
And like taking care of the roads and just caring for the resources.
I guess that's having feedback from all the different departments and doing the planning process, like that's the biggest difference, I guess. But as far as the actual treatment that's happening on the ground for the shaded fuel breaks, what does that look like for in the fire, like in the moment suppression versus?
Yeah, what are the differences and what it actually looks like?
Yeah.
It'll look pretty similar. My hope is that it will just be a little bit cleaner. We'll have a little more control over, like, say if there's chipping happening, we can really make sure that it's coming out how we want it. Like, we'll have contract administrators out there overseeing it, and we can say, hey, you didn't quite do that right. Can you go back and fix it? So.
The other thing when you do that firefighting, they come from all over the country. They all have different experiences and backgrounds, and in this case, it would be professionals who are used to managing, land in this area that would be doing it. And likewise with the equipment, right? Some of that equipment comes from different places, and sometimes it's Farmer John with a piece of equipment, and he's probably got a Viper contract, so he shows up and they go out there and do their best, right? Where this is, planned, it's under contract, we're administering it, they're professional woodsmen that are out there, and so it's just a different, not only the fire and the pressure around that, but also the types of equipment and kind of the mindset and the people and the oversight that we have, frankly, because in fire, we bring a fire team in to manage it. We give them leader's intent and they go do their thing. We have very little micromanagement of what they do, and that's when things happen that we'd probably rather not have happen.
Darren, that looks like micromanaging to me, all of those little polygons.
Different kind of micromanaging.
Well, okay, does doing it right involve removing the snags from previous fires because they're so flammable and dangerous? Is that part of doing it right?
So there's one area in this project that is up towards Camp Malacqua. It's exactly what you're talking about with, it's all snags, it's high severity fire scars.
I'm talking about the 35,000 acres.
Yeah, and most of this 35,000 acres is not high severity fire. It's really small portions that have burned in there.
No, I'm talking about salvage.
Well, are you asking if we would salvage?
When a fire goes through green trees, it leaves a bunch of dead trees.
Yes.
And then that is a lot more flammable and burns a lot hotter. A lot of scientists did the studies on that in the Tillamook burns in the 30s and 40s. And we're leaving all those fuels out there and they're burning hotter. And the Charlton area is a perfect example of what happens with the roadless area when you leave all the fuels in place and it reburns again. It kills all the wildlife. The smoke kills people. Economically, we've got school problems and road problems, and we're doing busy work. And that's 35,000 acres. But one day, the Holiday Farm fire burned 37,000 acres. It didn't follow preconceived pods. It burnt snags. They cast flame embers over a mile in advance. That's what we're trying to stop. And in the meantime, we're trying to keep our schools open again and the roads open again.
I'm following up on what you said too, Bob. This thinning works really well at certain fuel types. It doesn't work very well on Western Oregon fuel types because within 2 years it grows right back.
Yep.
I mean, it's not very
They invented that
sensible
at
to do
Oregon
it.
State in the early 90s, Jerry
Unless you-
Franklin and Norm Johnson and
Right.
Sessions, and they did that for about 3 or 5 years, and everybody thought it was great. I went back 10 or 15 years later, and they said they stopped doing it. It was way too expensive.
Yeah.
And it's,
Unless you're
it's
going to
dumb.
spray it, it doesn't
do
make
anything.
any sense.
Yeah,
You know?
it's just busy
But-
work.
One thing I have is a BLM, if you know where Martin Ridge is up on Good Pasture, they went up and did that whole road, and they did 150 feet on either side of the road, cut all the trees were burnt, they're all dead. They harvested all those trees because obviously there's going to be snags falling into the road every year from those. And in Brighton-Bush, up there in Detroit Ranger Station, they didn't cut out that whole road going up to Brighton Brush Hot Springs, because they had so many environmental lawsuits against it. So here, this year, they hired Brinks to go in there and cut those trees out so they could open those roads back up. They're paying them $3.5 million to do that, where if they'd harvest them after the fire, you would have got $3.5 million in revenue from that. It just seems we're counterproductive here. And like Bob was saying, the Holiday Farm fire was a crown fire. It wasn't a ground fire in very many places. It wasn't when it came down to my house, when it finally slowed down and dropped down to the ground. But treating the brush is not going to help the crown fire.
Nothing, really, realistically, nothing we do is going
Right.
to stop a fire like Holiday
Well,
Farm.
if you can take those trees 150 feet on either side of the road and the brush, because you're going to get both when you clear cut the whole area from 150 feet each side of the road, you're going to have a pretty wide fire break there. You know, that's the same thing you're doing with the massacres running up and down the roads trying to do that. But this would do it a lot farther. And you get timber for the schools, and you make a whole lot of jobs here.
Yep.
So just cutting the brush doesn't seem very reasonable to me.
So and this maybe and this is why Abby can keep me straight if I get out of line here. But really, you know, the intent of doing those treatments on the road is not to stop a fire, right? We all know that it's probably, if we have anything, especially like Holiday Farm, it's not going to stop it. What it does is it offers a place where firefighters can safely hold a road, right, or burn off of a road, or give them a place to give them a chance. Because really, that's what we do first, right? And this is a good example. You know, Chandra brought up the fire line that was done for Boulder when it was going when the Lookout fire was going to go across that way. And what happened after we had that in, the next year we had a fire on Boulder, like within that box. And what that does is our firefighters say, hey, we've got a backstop, right? That road is cleared. We can fall back and burn from that and do it safely. So we don't have to focus there. We can focus and try and go direct to keep the fire as small as possible, knowing that if we miss it or can't get it, we can fall back to that road. So typically what we'll do with firefighting is they go direct, but they have to know, like, hey, we need a fallback position. So they'll end up go back and treating that road. And so we're wasting our time. We're not wasting our time. We're investing our time in treating that road instead of going direct. And then we're you know, the fire's getting bigger by doing that, right? We're trading acres for safety, for firefighter safety. And so by having those on the landscape already, you have an opportunity, a place to fall back. You already have that kind of like a sketch on the landscape to know that you can fall back to as a firefighter. And so that's, I think just...
I'm really familiar with that, Darren.
Yeah.
Here's another question I have. Can you put the map up of that area that you're doing again? It's 7,898 acres.
Of treatment within that
That's
30,000.
Foley Ridge, Scott Creek, Valley,
Yep.
Boulder Creek.
Yep. Up to
Um,
Robinson, probably.
Hardly any of that burned except part of Foley there and a little bit on Boulder Creek, a little small part that jumped over.
Not Foley.
It's not Foley.
Foley's not.
Foley's on the other side of
It's
the property
Tupelo,
too.
Scott, Boulder, Lally, Robinson.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, Foley's on this side of 242. I couldn't see it. I thought that was South Fork.
Darren?
Anyways, why aren't we doing it on the side that all burned up and has all the dead trees in it? Because all
No,
those
so-
roads are at hazard right now because all those dead trees are gonna be falling across those roads. You're gonna have to close them, or you're gonna have all kinds of trees falling over them. You do like BLM did and cut 150 feet on either side.
Yeah, the challenge is, you know, that you have to get to those dead trees within a year, maybe two if they're big enough. And I know that they're on some of those roadside danger projects they're doing on the Middle Fork. Some of the larger trees in the areas that are going in the cedar fire scar, they're finding do still have some value, but that's the challenge there, Dana. is
They're
we-
finding
is
the
you gotta
old
get there
growth
early.
up on Brighton Bush too. Zone Jenny is Brinks, and he's saying that anything over 4 feet, they're sending them to the mill.
Yeah, because they're still sound
still
enough.
enough.
Exactly,
It has
but
a
those are
lot
the
of
only
input.
ones that are still sound.
Yeah.
They're not sound otherwise, and that's why those projects are so expensive, right? Millions and millions of dollars is because they don't have any value. So the trees are being harvested and used, or they're being turned into chips, or they're being used
Right.
as fish logs or for other uses
I know
because they
you
don't
got-
have any economic value.
So many people against harvesting any logs, and they're suing you. I think there were 7 different lawsuits against Breitenbush. But, you know, I don't know, we gotta somehow get past that, because now they're paying, the Forest Service is paying out $3.5 million.
The Forest Service, we.
Yeah, us.
Yeah, exactly.
Me too.
We're all paying for it, exactly.
But, you know, that, and the BLM went up there and harvested all of
Mhm.
that road out, going up off of Good Pasture.
There-
It looks
there-
great right now. There's no trees gonna be falling across yet.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, they didn't get all the rest of the 100,000 acres that needed to be cut too.
Darren,
I'll let the facilitator. I see there was hands that came up.
Yeah, I don't think I saw it anywhere in the materials, but is there an estimate yet of how much volume you expect to harvest from the 7,800 acres? Looking at you.
I was saying 120 million, that's what I was thinking of,
Yeah.
120 million.
That's like one clear cut.
No. Your day, not this day.
Darren, you were talking about the cost of all these fuel treatment projects, and I mean, from the Scott Mountain fire to the Boulder Creek fire and these other ones, there's been treatments done in this area. Do you know how much the road shaded fuel breaks might cost and how often you'll have to do that as they do grow back?
Well, hopefully, the value of the trees will pay for the removal.
On
And
the
that's
shaded
another
fuel breaks.
benefit, yeah, but and when we do it under an emergency fire, it costs a lot of money because we're paying people to do it. We recoup some of that money sometimes when we sell those trees. But no, this wouldn't cost anything because the value of the trees would pay for the work.
Is it the value of the trees taken out of the shaded fuel breaks or the value of the
All of
trees
it.
taken out of?
Yeah. Every tree that's over, what, 6 or 8 inches? 6 inches?
7 inches.
7 inches, anything over 7 inches is merchantable, and so those would pay for the work. So it's a better way to do the work, not just that, and we kind of left the economic part out of it, but there's the responsible way to do it under a contract, and also, yeah, the value of the trees, pays for its removal.
How often would you have to redo those shaded fuel breaks though?
So that's
Yeah,
you're
that's kind of, we'll have to see, but I would, like, 8. I mean, I can't really say for sure right now. You can look at Shadi.
Yeah, I was looking at 6 to 8 years, I was right in that ballpark, and couldn't do the maintenance on some of the shrubs.
But this is, it's newer to us.
And
Fuel's
then-
on the west side.
And also, to remember, the reason why it's kind of hard to gauge, like she said, we're leaving some canopy out there too, we're not just clearing both sides of the road, right, so. that's-
Yeah.
Isn't that the point though, Shadi, of the shaded part of a fuel break? You're trying to shade out, so you're not having to spray, right? Shade out the brush, so to actually implement that wider break in the fuel structure, but keep the brush component at a minimum, so you're not having to, every 5 years, run a masticator out there and at taxpayer expense.
Absolutely.
Kind of a follow-up question for that too. If you're wanting to keep the shade in the shaded fuel breaks, how does that factor into the thinning, the skips? And I mean, you're opening up the canopy then, and then you're going to reintroduce lots of extra growth. And
We're pretty much-
wouldn't you want to retain the canopy then?
But we're pretty much hitting those ladder field trees, right, and keeping those more dominant trees there, right, so for the to maintain the shade. So it's most of those intermediate trees that's underneath are getting taken out. It's those ladder fields that can reach the canopy and run. That's the kind of idea we're doing. So we're basically looking at keeping the dominant trees and anything touching that canopy, trying to give it a break from not touching.
Mhm.
So we're moving. That's how we're.
These are a lot of post clear cuts from the 90s though, right? So they're all kind of like same
Older,
age
I don't know, they're probably a lot older.
Yeah,
than
some
that.
70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah, I mean, look, like the variable density thinnings are plantations, right? They're all under 80. They're all clear cuts.
Yeah.
The shaded fuel break has and Malcolm can tell you too. They got different age groups from 30 to
For sure.
120 years old. So.
But like if you're talking about the thinning units and you're not, if you're taking out more of that in the thinning units, you're not retaining the canopy, you're introducing more light. Isn't that kind of counterintuitive for wanting to?
In the thinning units, I'm maintaining a 40% canopy cover, right? So you will have some partial light, so it will stimulate some understory. But I also want to keep some habitat there, right? I don't just want to have it all. I just want to make it quality dispersal and move that stand to more some natural characteristics, maybe some overgrowth characteristics or something in a little faster time by density management. So in the thinnings, that's what I want. I kind of want some shrub layers and stuff too, right? But you're going to also have some 40% canopy because you're ignoring certain species, so you have some clumping going on.
So it's 40% retention?
In the variable density thinnings, in the heavy thins will be a little lower than that, but the majority of the stands there are 40% canopy cover. We're retaining 40% canopy cover.
That seems kind of low for like, wouldn't you have a lot of regrowth then and it'd be a lot thicker?
So the idea, if I can just interject, when we talk about fuel breaks, originally they were just clear, nothing there. And the idea of a shaded fuel break, it is different from a timber sale. It's simply keeping some shade there. Those trees that stay will cast shade and it will help. So that's really what we're talking about with a shaded fuel break, is it's not a straight up clear,
For
clear
sure.
area.
I guess I'm just thinking of the thinning units though, because if you're
Okay.
trying to reduce fire risk, you'd want to retain the shade. And if the thinning units are then removing over 50, 40, 40, if you're retaining 40% of the canopy cover, you're opening it up to then allow more brush to grow, and then that's reintroducing fire risk, right?
Well, when you open it up at that same time, the residuals are growing back together too. You know what I'm saying? So it's only a short.
Yeah.
And
a
it's
short
also
lived-
variable.
It's-
So
yeah, it's variable.
it's not an even, that's an average, that 40%. So there could be a little clump here, there could be a gap here.
Well, and Darian and others can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that it's helpful to differentiate the goals between the shaded fuel break and the fire and egress, getting an anchor point for a fire and that being the emphasis for that treatment, and the emphasis for treatment for the area-based thinnings or the variable density thinnings. Like, the goal isn't there necessarily going to be reducing fire risk, but we're going to lean on the other purposes and need of the project, which is to produce, forest products for the local economy. And we can pull up that slide, but there's a handful of other purposes and needs of the project that are not just simply fire risk reduction.
Structural diversity, the stuff they would
So you're talking about just thinning the underbrush, the 7-inch plus
Depending on
trees.
what's-
You're not taking any old growth out, right?
The biggest and best trees are staying. It is the simplest way to put it.
So we're not
right?
gonna get any money out of it, really.
Yeah, I don't know, Chatty, what, I mean, the markets are, the markets do this, right? So who knows what's right actually. What'd you say was gonna be, how much volume?
120 million feet.
So, I mean, there will be, that's a pretty decent amount of volume for.
You pull up that map of the clear cuts up there, and they get 120 feet, and every 40-acre clear cut up there. And there's a lot of.
I'm concerned that we're making fuel breaks in an area that hasn't burnt, and we're not salvaging the areas that have burnt. From 52 until 87, there was one fire in all of Western Oregon that was over 10,000 acres because we had people in the woods, we had roads, and now we send in crews from other countries, from New Zealand, from Mexico, from other states, Alaska, Colorado, and then they take all the money and they send it out and they leave us a mess. And we don't have any funding to clean it up. Our schools are growing broke. Our roads are crap. We've got horrible looking landscapes. This is not what I inherited from my grandparents. I've got great grandkids, and we go out and we get gated roads, and we got dead trees, and we got buffers of weeds required by regulation. This is all in the last 30 or 35 years that we've invented all of these things like shaded fuel breaks. Why are we putting in fuel breaks at a cost to our schools without local businesses being particularly involved when we don't have a fire? Those used to be roads, those used to be access roads, there was hunting roads, there were logging roads, there were management roads, and now they're shaded fuel breaks. And the chance of them breaking a fire, all they are is access for firefighters that haven't come here yet, for fires that haven't happened yet, because we're making PUDs, assuming that it's better to let the fires burn up and then rot and burn again, because that's what we've been doing for 30 years, rather than actively managing it for the benefit of our local businesses and our schools and that. We don't have the infrastructure in place to handle this anymore. We've got our schools going broke. We've got massive wildfires, and we're doing shaded fuel breaks out in the middle of nowhere that won't be maintained, that only produce enough money to pay for themselves. It seems like this is really, really busy work, and that if we could restore the landscape to how it was in the 1850s, we'd have a lot more diversity, we would make a lot more money for our schools, it would be a lot more beautiful, we'd have a lot more access for old people and children. So my comment's going to be, we should restore the whole 37,000 acres. We should save all of our old growth. If there's competing fuels in there, we should remove them, and that's profitable. We might need more infrastructure, but we should be investing in infrastructure rather than busy work. And these types of thinning projects and shaded fuel breaks for areas that haven't burnt yet, making preparations for people that are going to arrive from someplace else when they do burn. To me, it's just really a waste of taxpayer money, and there's a reason there's not very much public here today. You're all mostly professionals being paid to do this, and the people that end up doing these projects aren't going to make very much money. Nothing's going to be for the schools. We're going to have shaded fuel breaks that won't be maintained, and if a fire comes, it'll burn right through them. So that's my concern, is that this is too little too late. But it's not reversible. We could restore this, and each one of those blue areas there could be a management area, could be a sales area, with the objective of wildlife diversity, old growth restoration and maintenance and preservation, rather than burning it all up, letting it all go to waste, and making fuel breaks for future people to come in from other areas to fight fires that shouldn't be happening. Just my opinion.
I'd say me on that one. We've got, the fire burned 96,000 acres. A lot of it was on private land. All the private land, they harvested immediately. From
Yeah.
where my house is, I could see 9 different logging signs on hills from Weyerhaeuser right across from the house. They got after it the first year, and they took every merchantable tree they could out, and they replanted the same year. Behind my house, there's 660 acres. That whole thing burned up, and they came back that winter and replanted the entire thing, and now I got trees this high in there, and they harvested a lot of timber off of there.
A lot of jobs.
And you look at how much is left in there in the BLM and the Forest Service, there is just a ton of timber, and it's probably too late for most of it, like Darren says now, unless it's the big old growth stuff. But, you know, it's just a shame we didn't harvest it, you know, right after the fire.
Well, and the private lands burnt because the fires started on the federal lands for the most part, came out of federal lands, not in all cases, but most of them.
This fire here at the Holiday Farm fire, I fought it for 2 weeks, and it was fire, wind-driven fire, crown fire, that was blowing half a mile in front of us every 2 seconds, you know. It was not a fightable fire.
Yeah.
So we just tried to save people and as many houses as we could, but, you know, we didn't really have a chance. But in reality, it's like the Tillamook burn, you know. If you don't take care of all those dead trees and all that dead wood up there, it's gonna re-burn again.
Like the Charlton, like the Warner Creek, that's what keeps happening. What was mentioned earlier was that these trees lose all their value in a year, and there's a reason for that. But we block the lands off, and then we pay a lot of extra money to trees that should have been going into our schools and into our mills and into jobs like they used to use. So around the rest of the United States, if you have a landslide or a flood or a windstorm, local people go in and they take care of the actions, the feds come in and help them. That's what used to happen here. It wasn't a matter of a NEPA process in 2 years or 4 years. We'd go in immediately and sell immediately and harvest immediately. So National Wildfire Alliance that I belong to, national organization, we've been petitioning Congress and the president for the last, well, since the change of administration, to go in and declare an emergency so that as soon as we have an emergency, a massive wildfire, we can go in and start cleaning it up. And at that time, we can make a lot of money, a lot of jobs, keep it local, not have a lot of people come in from all over everywhere and taking the money with them, and we've got a safer environment.
The problem is we gotta limit the lawsuits against the
I'm sorry,
feds,
excuse
right?
me. I have some more questions about this project, if that's okay. Kyle, I wasn't sure if you were going to talk some more about GNA or someone from Sundance, but I'm curious how that authority is being used exactly and how that will work. Just because it's kind of a new thing for
Yeah.
doing such a large project on the McKenzie District with GNA, and I'm curious, like, you know, what role Sundance and ODF is having,
Right.
and how that'll all play out, just because it's kind of a new thing.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think, yeah, Christina did a good job of doing an overview of the project, but I think it is worth setting a stage a little bit and backing up for why the state forestry department is involved at all with federal forest projects. So we've had a federal forest restoration program in the state of Oregon for the last 13 years, and we have laws in place, direction to pursue projects, pursue good neighbor authority projects that increase timber harvest volume, contribute to job creation, reduce wildfire risk to all lands, and stimulate local economies. And that's pretty clear direction in statute. And so in doing that, we have four components of the program, and all sort of work in a comprehensive way to achieve the mission of the program, to accelerate the pace, scale, and quality of forest restoration in Oregon on federal lands. The first is collaboration. We invest in forest collaboratives. I think, you know, although not a traditional forest collaborative, the McKenzie Watershed Stewardship Group was a recipient of one of our support mechanisms that we had in the program over the years. And so that's a pretty critical piece of the program to really foster consensus and agreement seeking among local, the public, basically. We have a planning component, and that's where this project comes in, is we support the planning efforts of our federal forest managers to bring, you know, restoration projects that make our forests more resilient to all forms of disturbance, wildfire being one, but also insect and disease and even, you know, wind. And so that's another component. We invest pretty heavily in that arena, and that's why part of the reason why we have this project here before us today is by leveraging, you know, some state funds that are allocated to the program, but also leveraging other federal funds, applying for grants essentially to do this type of work. And the idea being that the Forest Service, the Willamette, can focus their resources on other projects to really, our goal is to be additive. That's another thing that statute directs us to do. And so that's why these projects are something that we have prioritized, is because we're trying to pursue work that allows the Forest Service to focus elsewhere. And that's how we can clearly show additionality. Not just for timber volume, but to get more, you know, acres restored, essentially. So we have an implementation component of the program that's implementing the work under Good Neighbor Authority. And so we have about 40 staff. It's a relatively small team, but we're able to, you know, get, I think, a lot of work done proportional to our size. We have a couple staff in Staten that sort of, and a couple staff in Springfield that work in partnership directly with the Willamette. And then, of course, we have some monitoring work that we invest in to basically say, hey, did we achieve what we wanted to achieve? And so that all four of those components are things that, you know, work together to allow us to achieve our mission. And you know, we've been working together, I think, since 2018 or 2017 is when we signed the first GNA agreement on the Willamette. So it's been quite a while now that we've developed this relationship, and this is, I think, the next progression of that relationship, and trying to add value really in the best way we can. I mean, at the end of the day, we're trying to fill, you know, meet the constraints that the Forest Service has in achieving, you know, our mutual goals. And so that's where we've gotten to, you know, really, again, supporting in any way we can the the development and the compliance, the environmental compliance of projects like the Thai project. And so we have 3 other projects like this across the state, and I brought a handout, our latest fact sheet, and it shows kind of where those projects are across the state. But these are a priority of ours and will be moving forward because of that additionality piece. We're again directed to be additive, and the best way to do that is what we turn these projects A to Z. We try to invest in supporting both the planning and the implementation of these projects, and even monitoring, to kind of support the full life cycle of a project. That's how we can be, at least, show clear additionality. So anyways, that hopefully answers your question.
Well, it answers the general question. I guess I'm curious about, I brought up another thing. I'm just, Sundance and ODF staff are doing some of the NEPA analysis, and sounds like surveys, and also overseeing implementation. Is that?
So the Sundance is just getting us.
How the Forest Service staff play into that, like as supervision, or like,
Yeah.
are they busy doing other things, like you said? And
Well, let me take a stab, and then Darren can follow up. So Sundance is providing experts, and that's, some of them are here today, in their respective fields, to do the actual surveys and the documentation and the analysis. So the surveys, right, figure out what's out there, the analysis, what laws and regulations do we have to adhere to mitigate for the impacts of the proposed action, and then documentation, like releasing, the proposed, decision, and the actions that are proposed, and then the mitigation measures that are, intended to limit the impacts on resources. But all the while supporting the effort, and the ultimate decision rests with the Forest Service. And so with that, there's basically a team of specialists, Ruby's one, but others on the forest, that are essentially working in conjunction with Sundance. The intention is that Sundance and team, and that contract team, picks up the bulk of the work. That's the reason we're working with them, and that's why we're spending, money to have them on board. The intention is that they add value and they lighten the lift for Ruby and her colleagues, but she's still going to be, working with her counterpart, in this case Fran, right? To make sure that what, the survey designs are the right, set up in the right fashion, and that, that their documents are accurate. So there's a back and forth basically between the Forest Service at the staff level. And then essentially it's a offering of a decision document to the line officer, and then from there that goes into a whole other phase of the project. Sundance has done their work and they're done, and then we can enter into this phase of how does the implementation work, and I think the intention for this project is that at least portions of it would be implemented under Good Neighbor Authority by ODF staff, again with this understanding that, hey, we need to lighten the load for the Forest Service and add some value there. So,
yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I just would maybe go a step further, and or before that, like our specialists were a part of building the contract that they're then implementing, right? So making sure that the contract meets the needs of what our specialists and what our obligations are for managing the forest. So, and then all the things that Kyle said. And then, the one thing that's separate a little bit too is consultation. So the Sundance will be writing the consultation documents, but that's something we can't give away. So we would still be doing consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries and whomever on all the fish and wildlife issues. So that's something that's still inherent to us, although the documents would be for the most part written by Sundance. And then implementation-wise, it'd be a suite of implementation, just as we would sell other timber sales, right? Whether it's through Good Neighbor Authority, or whether it's through stewardship, or a traditional sale, or all those different things, and all those different sale types then have different, economic benefits or consequences to local businesses and communities and whatnot.
And I would just mention one thing on the contract NEPA piece, like although it is relatively new concept for the Forest Service and to a certain extent the BLM, it's actually really a frequent practice for all of the federal agencies to have the environmental compliance done by a third party, a contract firm, and these are firms like Sundance are doing this work for FEMA, for the Department of Transportation, for a lot of other federal agencies. So there's a good, there's a relatively robust ecosystem of contractors that work in environmental compliance, and so just wanted to throw that out there.
When you do the sale, do the schools and roads get 25% like the law says?
Yeah, that's
Or does a
that's
good
part of
neighbor
the-
thing change everything around and then use other words kind of modify where the money's going?
So this is where I really lean on the additionality piece of why we're involved, okay? So why we really stress additionality is that this wouldn't have otherwise happened. We were able to invest $1.7 million in procuring the services to get this project to a signed decision in the spring of next year or fall of next year, so that the Forest Service could focus on their normal program of work, which includes timber sales that generate revenue and do generate.
So is that a no, that
So
these
Good Neighbor
sales
Authority-
won't get 25% to
I
the
was
schools?
going to get there. 25. So Good Neighbor Authority and stewardship sales, you probably know this, Bob, but those don't have the 25% payment to the counties.
Okay.
But the intention is that work, at least for Good Neighbor Authority, I can't control stewardship, but that's additional to whatever the normal program of work that the Forest Service can take on. And so it doesn't impact the 25%. That's at least our intention. And that's why we lean on these A to Z projects, so that we are not sort of impacting the normal program, what I'll term the normal program of work for the Forest Service.
Yeah, which is, what he's talking about here is, we have been for the last several years doing about 60 million board feet, 60 to 70 million board feet has the Willamette. As you know, our current direction is or maybe you don't know, our current direction is to move to 130 million board feet.
Yeah.
We actually have fewer employees and less resources than we had before. So we would plan to say, hey, we think we can get to this, maintain that 60 million board feet. So the additive or the increased pace and scale you're talking about, for us to get to that 130 million board feet and be successful, we need to have other ways of doing business like this, like the support and working with Good Neighbor Authority and contractors to help, just like was described, right? So we can keep moving on other projects that we're working on, like the Callaway project that we're about to just finish up and sign here pretty soon. And so that's how this adds. And then there's different ways. I know that the one way that money from timber sales gets to the communities is through that 25% to the counties from the way we traditionally sell sales.
Schools and roads with the Forest Service,
All that
that's county
stuff.
with full and C.
Yeah, all that stuff, and then but other ways like Good Neighbor Authority or with stewardship, there are other ways that we contract that we can specify to local businesses and where and really give deference of who gets that contract to where they get their people from, where they're going to spend their money and things like that, so we can have an economic impact differently using stewardship than the money just doesn't go to counties. It can get to the community a different way.
Well, there's the 1897 Organic Act, which is supposed to be driving the law, says that local work is supposed to be it's all supposed to be local for one. It's supposed to be manufacturing goods for the people of the United States. The money goes, once I created the Forest Service, specifically to schools and roads. And by having Good Neighbor projects and thinning projects and 60 million feet sales in a forest that grows over 1 billion feet a year, that's not sustained yield. And our schools and roads are going broke in our small towns, whether it's Blue River or Oak Ridge or Westford, have really suffered with this kind of approach. And the problem that I'm constantly concerned with is this kind of approach not only causes poverty in our rural areas, it causes massive catastrophic wildfires and really expensive to the taxpayers, and the money doesn't stay in the community either. It goes to Alaska or Mexico or New Zealand or
Yeah.
Colorado. And
I
so-
hear you, Bob. So let's maybe,
So how do we reverse that process?
Yeah, what we're talking about here is implementation, and we could talk about that. You, me, and Shadi, we could talk about implementation and sales and money and things like that. But that's kind of getting beyond the project and the scoping and kind of what we're talking about. We're here to hear what people want to comment about the project. We could talk about the economics and how we sell the stuff later. But before we can do anything and get any money to the community, we have to complete the NEPA and get through this planning process. So, let's maybe, we could talk about the
No,
economics.
I'm talking about this project specifically. It seems like this is a real opportunity to lead with the restoration approach rather than this weird thinning and fire breaks and all that. But using a forest restoration approach, we could produce millions of dollars for our schools. We could produce hundreds of local jobs. We could make the area safer for wildfire. Dealing with this project here, if we expanded all those little polygons into the larger polygons and approached it from
Here's the
a-
problem with that, Bob, and we could talk about this. I don't want to necessarily have this conversation, but we will. But so there's reasons why it looks like it looks, right?
I
Because
know
those
that.
white spaces are old growth. They are forest plan things we have a forest plan that tells us how we can manage.
Yep.
That's basically, we can't manage the way you were explaining it. It's simplifying it in a way that's way too simple. And you should know this as a forestry person. What you said NFMA, that's what our forest plan is based on. That's why we have what we have out here right now and why we can't go into those other spaces. So, I mean, I get it, and you want to have a larger conversation about that, that's fine, but I'm not sure this is the right place to have that conversation, Bob, because this is just an example. Every project we do looks like this. Callaway looks like this. It's what we do. We manage stands that have been previously managed. That's the landscape we have. We're not going to go into those other places because A, the forest plan says we can't. ESA, old growth, yada yada, are the reasons why we can't go to those places. So really, when I look at that map, and I don't know, Shadi, that looks like we're treating a lot of acres in a landscape that's like that
I'm
size.
impressed with Sundance, man.
I'm looking at the Holiday Farm fire.
How did you pick this area? Because it has very little fire burn in it right now, instead of, like the Lookout fire burn or one of the other areas that.
So our district is 580,000 acres?
545,000.
545,000 acres. Of that, we can manage 40% of it. That's either matrix or AMA. The rest is wilderness, riparian reserves, H.J. Andrews, places that we can't, or that they're administratively removed from management, right? So we can manage 40% of our acres, give or take, of that 580,000. So we're already down to whatever that math is. Some of you engineer type people might be able to figure out 200 whatever thousand acres that is. And then of that, there's other things that we have to consider, like old growth and other things like that. So you just kind of LSR, you kind of just shrink it down. And so really, realistically, us on the McKenzie River Ranger District have been doing roughly 25 million board feet a year for the last 20 years. We've been doing laps around the district trying to meet our target, trying to get that volume that we're funded to provide, and then that we're directed to
Get
do.
sued on every damn timber sale
Yeah, you
put up
got it.
there.
So really, we're I heard this term, dodging raindrops recently, and that's kind of what it feels like sometimes.
Yeah,
Right? We're out there
dodging lawsuits.
we're trying to dodge raindrops out there and do the best we can. So there's a lot of constraints, and as you guys know, I mean, we manage these forests for the entire American public, right? And everybody has a different opinion, as you might know, on how we should manage those forests. And so, I mean, I look at that and say, man, we're doing a pretty good chunk of that ground right there based on what we can do. And so to get to why here is because this is part of that rotation of places to go, right? Our flat country project was planned here. That was pulled, at a national level. And so, hey, this is a flat area. It's an area that we haven't been to in a while. And in our lap around the district, this is kind of next up, right? And then it'll be Smitty will be the next one, kind of in the I guess, Upper McKenzie area.
Smith Reservoir, that
Yep,
area. all
exactly,
between there and the
Smith,
highway.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yep,
there's
up
a
there.
lot of area there. too.
And then we'll be back basically we'll be back down to the 19 road, back down to, and you know, Callaway takes up the whole Blue River watershed. So if you look at the map of our district and those 40% of the acres that we can actually manage, it's not a lot. And so this is, yeah, that's
Some of the
why.
interesting things there, I've hunted in this area for 50 years,
Mhm.
and there used to be a lot of deer and elk in there when there was clear cuts.
Yeah.
That's what they feed on.
Yep.
You know, they need the old growth too to get under in the wintertime and stuff. But places like Fingerboard Prairie that were just really cool meadows are all gone now, they're all
Yep.
grown in. And the elk and the deer aren't in there near as much because you got 30, 40-foot tall regrowth in there that are so thick they can't even get underneath them. So we're not managing it for wildlife very well, the smaller wildlife, rabbits and shit like that, but deer and elk are moving on to the clear cuts, and the managed forest is farther downriver here. So,
We can't have a forest opening greater than 3 acres. According to our forest plan, we cannot have.
see all those yellow spots? Those are 40 acres. 40 acres is what the limit was when I
Our
was
limit
following
now is
timber.
3 acres, that's what we're mandated as the Forest Service.
That's not everywhere though.
That's nuts.
It depends on where you're talking. It's not a situation for 3 acres.
Well, that brought up a question in my mind. In the Flat Country project, wasn't there some planned meadow restoration enhancement? And is that a part of this project, or is that going to be done in a different way? Because that
Different,
seems
yeah.
like good work to benefit
Yeah.
the species you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Right, Bunchgrass Meadow, yes, we're ready to do that, and I guess we're waiting on this project.
Yeah, it's different, yeah.
Okay, it'll be done
That'd be
in a
wonderful.
as a
Yeah, it's
separate
different, yeah, we have
process.
different, and the challenge now is just our direction to focus on timber, right, and that 130 million board feet. And so those are more of the nice to do projects now, that, yeah, we do have those opportunities, and we have, is it programmatic NEPA, or we have some things covered for meadow treatments.
Meadow restoration.
Yeah, the challenging one with that bunchgrass meadow though is the elevation was challenging for snow and things like that. And then the other challenging part there, and this actually the treatment of that, and I guess this is where I'm going here, to use, say, stewardship or some way to generate revenue from these timber sales to pay for that restoration of the meadows, because that meadow has tree species that are not economically valuable. And so that's where something like here, where we could do a stewardship project, and part of the included work for that stewardship project could be doing the felling, removing, chipping, whatever of that. But yeah, we went around and around along that project. So I think it could be, but it would be a different CE. This project could definitely fund it.
Solve the question.
Well, I don't know if it's specific to this project area, but while I'm driving around, I see all the dead trees. I think about bugs. And how do you manage that and still have economic return?
Manage bugs like
Well, is it part of this project area?
bug kill?
Mm-hmm. Potential?
I don't think
There's
so.
not
is there?
very much in this area here,
Okay.
but if you start going across the river and down,
Right.
you'll find some.
Well, that would be part of the thinning, right, to remove.
Well, and that runs into the timeline
create,
of when you can afford to do it if it's already lost its value.
Yeah, well, there's nothing in here there's not too much bug kill already in here,
Okay.
but some of the thinning and resilience that would be a result of the thinning would be trees that are hopefully less drought, less stressed, right? Less competition, less stress, so they could fend off bugs more easily. So that could be part of the resilience that we're talking about here.
That thing is gonna bring back some wildlife too.
I was curious how much of this, how you, I don't know, how you're planning on managing the amount of slash that's left after the thinning. I've been seeing a lot of the thinning stuff up on Indian Ridge, up towards that on the 1980 road. And it seems like it's similar tree density and whatnot. There's some big gravel piles on the roadsides, but everything down off the road
Might have just
seemed like
burned
it
it,
was.
They actually did the road timber sale in 1986, but he's on the 1980, but we haven't treated those those piles yet, but in that area also is going to get some underburn, some fire lines in there, and they're going to do.
They are gonna underburn
On
some
some
of
of
them?
it's the hard timber sale, and some of those units will get underburn.
Okay.
So it's got to close out first. They got to use some helicopter units to finish off.
Because they burned the gravel piles, but there wasn't any piling done down off of the road, it looked like. Is there plans for underburning in this at all to like reduce the amount of splash that's in there?
Yeah, that'll be part of the analysis, is figuring out where underburning would be effective and also wise to doing. So we would use underburning as part of the post-harvest field reduction treatment where appropriate.
Okay. Do you have an idea of like, I don't know, rough percentage or like just to kind of
No, we're in the
quantify
really
it?
early phases right now, so that's kind of what the EA is for, and just giving the specialists a chance to analyze the ground and really get a better idea of that.
So are they gonna just chip all the brush and then take the logs, and the logging slash is gonna have to be burned, of course, but or somehow dealt with?
Yeah, chipping, we are analyzing for chipping in the shaded fuel break part, but there would be the commercial component, and then we would follow up with some kind of non-commercial treatment, which could look like chipping, it could look like hand piling and burning, or it could look like underburning.
Like there's a hole right now. We were just kind of like, what do we do? So what do you guys, what do we ask you? Do you want to keep asking questions like this? You guys want to kind of just,
Break up.
yeah, we could break up and just kind of roam the room. You can talk to Forest Service folks, the planning folks. You can look at our stuff out there. Or if you guys want to just continue in this kind of format, that's fine too. Is there anybody that has an opinion?
I'd like to make the same point that I was making before, but keep
I
it
heard you.
specific here. Well, has any research been done on this area for potential restoration to past conditions? That's been my question on, every time we hear the word restore, we're talking about thinning a plantation or something. And what I'm talking about is restoring it to an 1850 or a 1900 pattern. And I'm specific to this area, so it's a really valid concern and a question.
Yeah, I know. Restore is a term that maybe is challenging in this context, right? Because when you think about it, we're never going to go back to 1880, right? I mean, the way that the forests currently are, the way the environment is changing, whether you believe it or not, it is changing. And so you're never going to necessarily restore to what it was. I think resilience is probably a better word to try and make the landscape more resilient. Resilient to changing climate, resilient to bugs, resilient to fire, all of those kind of things. Because yeah, you can't go back, right? We can only go forward, and so and even set things up for where we think they might want to go in the future for our own management or for wildlife species that are important to us or whatever. But obviously that's challenging because you're trying to guess what might happen in the future, and that's not possible either. So yeah, it's the restoration term, and there's lots of conversation that's in my career that's been had around that term and how it's maybe doesn't really fit the intent, because it gives you the picture in your mind that we're going to restore it to something that once was,
Yep.
that we're never going to be able to go back to that.
Well, why
Actually, they're
not?
going back to some of that now with the fire